Carlton Davis put the NFL world on notice, and it is time for people to listen. That and more on today's episode of Locked On Bucs.
Your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, and welcome into this Thursday episode of Locked On Bucs, your daily podcast covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Again, we want to thank you so much for making Locked On Bucs your first listener view every single day. And don't forget, you can subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, you can also follow on Twitter. I am James Yarcho at JYarcho_Bucs. Deputy editor of SB Nation's BucsNation.com. And of course, you can follow my co-host David Harrison on Twitter at DHarrison82. Of course, David will not be on this episode with me. Instead, I am going to be joined by Tyler Dunne of GoLongTD.com, who wrote an absolutely fantastic feature on Buccaneers corner Carlton Davis. We are going to talk about Carlton Davis's comments. We're going to talk about Tyler's thoughts on the Buccaneers. He's going to tell you what he thinks of Baker Mayfield and much, much more. So without further ado, on this episode of Locked On Bucs, we'd like to welcome in Tyler Dunne of GoLongTD.com. I am joined now by Tyler Dunne of GoLongTD.com and the Go Long podcast. You can follow him on Twitter at Ty Dunne. That's TYDUNNE. And Tyler, thank you so much for coming on. For those that don't know, I'm not sure how you couldn't know, but for those that don't know, Tyler had an absolutely incredible feature on Carlton Davis last week over at GoLongTD.com that really pulled back the curtain on Davis, going back to his childhood in Miami, the violence that he was surrounded by, but didn't get himself sucked into, really separated himself from that side of his neighborhood growing up, all the way through today, where he is a Super Bowl champion and looking to put the NFL world on notice that the Buccaneers are not pushovers just because Tom Brady is gone. So I want to start, Tyler, with how all of this came to be. What was it about Carlton Davis that had you intrigued enough to seek him out and write this very long, very detailed, very well done feature?
Man, I appreciate the intro, and thank you so much for having me, James. It's awesome to be here. It's awesome to just kind of get immersed into Bucs Nation. I've heard from a lot of fans. It's stronger than I think most people think, more passionate than most people think. So the honor is all here. So at Go Long, I launched it November 2020, right as Tampa Bay was entering that Super Bowl run. And I just want to create a home for informed journalism. Let's go beyond the GIFs and the memes and the tweets and the takes and the fast food that seems to just kind of fatten all of us up, I guess, on our day-to-day lives when we're just refreshing all of our social media apps. So I really like to just sit down with players and have conversations, not interviews, and just kind of see where it goes. So it does take a willingness on somebody like Carlton Davis' part to know, all right, we're not going to just talk about X's and O's here for 5 minutes at his locker. We're sitting down for an hour and a half, and it's going to get pretty heavy. So what led to it was actually the week before that Super Bowl win against the Kansas City Chiefs. I was trying to do some Chiefs stuff, some Bucs stuff, and obviously we all saw what Tyreek Hill did to Carlton Davis. First time around, I think it was week 12, 269 yards, 3 touchdowns. It was just a massacre. It was brutal. I think it was in the 4 o'clock slot on CBS, and Carlton Davis was the one with the egg all over his face. I mean, it was brutal, but I liked his style from afar. I love the spat with Michael Thomas. That was awesome. Like how he just went right at him in person and on social media. By the way, Michael Thomas has deleted his tweets. Carlton's are still up. So take that for what it's worth from that 3 years ago. And I got Carlton's number. And sometimes when you get a player's number, they answer 1 out of every 5 times. It's just, Usually they'll probably scared off by robocalls and spam and whatnot. He answered, and we talked for a half hour then about the rematch, about the fact that he wanted Tyreek Hill again, mano a mano, like hands-on, being aggressive, and he wasn't going to back down. And I just found that so refreshing. And at one point in that conversation, he mentioned his upbringing in Miami Gardens. He didn't really go there, didn't get too deep, but I just kind of stored that away in the back of my mind. And as I entered this offseason planning for different long-form stories, just thought it'd be great. Here's a team nobody's talking about, nobody's thinking about nationally. Tom Brady's gone. They've kind of been left for dead. The Buccaneers are a team that resembles a carcass on the side of the highway to most people. And I'm looking at the roster. I'm like, there's still a lot of really good players. Look at defensively. I mean, Jamel Dean, they re-signed. Levante David, Devin White, Shaq Barrett, Carlton Davis. Like, man, wonder if he'd want to sit down and maybe dig into what he alluded to in that first conversation. So that's what led to it. Credit to Tampa Bay's communications department. It was, just kind of came together through them. Some teams are better than others. I can absolutely say that. And they were willing to kind of quarterback the situation. And we sat down and talked for an hour and a half about everything. And honestly, the Tom Brady stuff and what he thinks about the season and everybody being in for a rude awakening, that probably came up like an hour in the conversation. Obviously, the radar goes off like, holy hell, that's really interesting. And people will want to hear that. But his story absolutely runs deeper than the quote everybody saw.
Yeah, it absolutely does. And it's easy. One of the easiest takeaways from what you were able to put together about him is that Davis definitely is not lacking in the confidence department. Like, there's absolutely no question. He flat out, and of course, the quote that ran wild was that they are going to quote unquote wreck stuff. We're a family friendly podcast. We're going to say stuff.
Well, that's good to know, because I was just going to start swearing like crazy. So good. Thanks, James.
More with Tyler Dunne coming up here next on the Locked On Bucs podcast. Our partners at eBay Motors have teamed up with Locked On Fantasy Football host Vinny Iyer to bring you some of the best fantasy picks each week, all season long. Whether you're preparing for a draft or scouting the waiver wire, every week we're going to provide you players that are guaranteed to fit on your roster. So with draft prep underway for the upcoming fantasy season, let's see who Vinny has picked out for us on this week's eBay's Guaranteed Fit Fantasy Picks of the Week. Which running back has scored the most touchdowns combined the past two seasons? That is the electric Los Angeles Charger Austin Eckler, whose 38 scores since 2021 and featured receiving first role makes him a guaranteed fit for the first overall pick in 2023 fantasy football drafts. Eckler will see his usual high leverage work as a runner and remain the focal point of the short passing game. Vinny Iyer from Locked On Fantasy Football is going to help you win your fantasy championship, and eBay Motors knows a championship team is about each player being the perfect fit, same as your vehicle. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, over 122 million parts and accessories for your vehicle right at your fingertips, you can make sure your ride stays running smoothly. Air filters, brakes, batteries, taillights, alternators, shocks, struts, you name it, eBay Motors has it. And they'll make sure that it's the right fit for your car, because eBay Guaranteed Fit helps you understand exactly what part you need for your vehicle the first time. So go forth, switch gears, crank the AC, say goodbye to sweating if your ride needs a little fixing up, because now you know you'll always be set up for success from the get-go. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, everything your vehicle is calling for is just a click away. For parts and accessories that fit your vehicle, just look for the green check. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices at ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Thank you again for making Locked On Bucs your first listener view every single day. David and I will be back together for tomorrow's episode, but for now, let's get back to more of that conversation with Tyler Dunne of GoLongTD.com. So yeah, he says they're going to wreck stuff, but what are your thoughts on the Buccaneers this season and all the changes that we've seen, the disappointing year last year, that they're trying to bounce back from. And of course, doing that all without the guy that brought the spotlight to Tampa Bay. Because David and I on this show have talked a long time about how, going back to the Jameis Winston seasons, that this is an incredibly talented roster. There are a lot of players on this team that would be Pro Bowlers and all pros if they were on Dallas or Green Bay or Kansas City or San Francisco, these teams that get all the national attention all the time. And now Tom Brady's gone. That spotlight is gone. And like you said, they're left for dead. No one wants to give them a chance at all. So you take a look at this team. What are your thoughts on how the Buccaneers are?
Start right there on defense, because you're right. They've always been really good on defense. Even go back to the old Tampa 2 days. That is what the Tampa Bay Buccaneers have embodied generation to generation. And Carlton Davis made that point. I think, to me, football it's not played on a spreadsheet. It's not played in a mathematical equation. Look, they've got some questions to figure out on offense. I don't want to minimize the fact that, Baker Mayfield, Kyle Trask are staging this quarterback competition, and they had the worst rushing game in the league last year. So there's legit stuff they got to work out. And we'll get to that, I'm sure, because there's a lot that does excite me over there. But defensively, I mean, you have guys that have been in that moment, in that playoff moment, when the pressure is highest, when you've got to make a play on 3rd and 8 in a packed stadium against these elite quarterbacks. And guess what? The Patrick Mahomeses, the Josh Allens, the Joe Burrows, Trevor Lawrences, throw whoever you want out there, Jalen Hurts. Like, I think for the longest time, we looked at blitzing as a poison pill, and it's been a poison pill at times. There, Tampa Bay. We saw what happened in the divisional round against the Rams. But give me that approach. Give me the approach of, we're going to blitz you, we're going to pressure you, we're going to go down swinging, over what we see here in Buffalo. I live in Western New York with Sean McDermott. It's a lot of sitting back, kind of being passive, sitting in coverage, try to confuse you, give you different looks. I don't know. I feel like these quarterbacks are all so damn smart. They're going to figure you out. I mean, you could drop 11 guys into coverage, and Joe Burrow's going to thread that needle. They're mentally on just a different plane. So that's where I think Todd Bowles is right. Blitz teams, pressure teams, play with an attitude that I don't know how you quantify it. I really don't. I don't know what you look at to say this team just has a snarl about them, that they're going to kick you, where, and they're going to dance all over your grave. Like, they're going to take the peace sign like Antoine Winfield did and stick it in Tyreek's face. Give me that approach, that temperament. And I really feel like where Carlton Davis comes from makes him the perfect leader for that brand of football. It's age 5 to 15, there's 30,000 kids in the South Florida Youth Football League, and you've got drug dealers gambling on your games, tens of thousands of dollars, and there's gunfire, and you're hitting the deck as a little kid or running for shelter. Like, there's no pressure in the playoffs when you're Carlton Davis, or the Super Bowl, or facing Tyreek Hill in that round 2 game when you've been through that, when so many of your friends are in prison or dead, and you found a way to take all the good of that situation. And he's not saying like, oh, I had to escape the streets, it was all just terrible. No, like, there's a lot of good. He played football in the streets with his buddies, block to block to block, beating people up, like him and his brothers. That was a menacing crew. I think that there's a lot of good he took from it. Yeah, he was able to thread the needle, avoid the bad. And when you come from that situation, you are equipped, I feel like, for everything that pro football throws at you. It's a different profession. I mean, you are legally able to just whip somebody's behind for a living. The Buccaneers get it. And I think this defense is still really good. For the players you probably discuss all the time on this pod, I mean, Shaq Barrett, Jamel Dean, Levante David, Devin White, you still have studs at every level. That if your offense can get to 20 points, 21 points in that NFC South and that NFC, this team can make the playoffs. Why not? And I mean, offensively, we saw what the offensive coordinator Dave Canales just did with Geno Smith. I mean, Geno Smith, who became a career backup that we hadn't seen at all. He's working with him behind the scenes. Granted, you've got like close to a decade of reps to get to what we saw last year, to get to that comeback player of the year type of season. But I think he knows what he's got to get out of Baker. I've always been a Baker Mayfield fan. I think he has all of that stuff that you want in your quarterback, the intangibles. If he lacks, the ability to pick you apart like Tom Brady could, I think that the offense would just be better. I mean, your listeners saw their offense last year. It was the quarterback was a sitting duck, throwing it 60 times a game. There was no running game. You just hope that he bailed you out in the fourth quarter, and somehow they won a bad division. I feel like you're going to have an actual offensive system, a better offensive line, and Rachaad White. I mean, he could be a star. I think Rachaad White's special.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, David, he always throws up the pitchforks anytime we talk about Rachaad White, with David being an Arizona State alum. But I want to circle back to Carlton Davis. He's not the biggest talker. He's not the flashiest player. He's not the spotlight guy. He's not a Richard Sherman or even now a Sauce Gardner. But in speaking with him, what do you think makes him as good as he is and gives him that confidence that we've talked about so much to go up against the Jamar Chases, the Tyreek Hills, to open this season going up against Justin Jefferson? What makes him that guy?
It's a really good point too, James, on just his personality. Because I think if you don't understand the Bucs or Carlton Davis, or which it would be a lot of people who consumed those quotes this past week, you'd think, oh, this is just another caricature, a cartoonish cornerback trying to make a name for himself. Because we've seen plenty. I can remember 5 years ago. I mean, Jalen Ramsey's damn good, but Jalen Ramsey just talking to GQ, and I mean, he bashed just about every quarterback in the league, called Josh Allen trash. That's not Carlton Davis, like, at all. Like, I think he was just being honest, which is what we want out of our athletes. We want them to say how they really feel. He is genuinely confident, bordering on cocky, which is what I want out of my cornerback facing every wide receiver one in the NFL. And he's real because of what he went through. It's a game. It's a sport. It's a game. So I think what makes him special is the way he speaks, the way he acts, the way he leads is reflected in his play style. And, the NFL is going soft in a lot of different ways. It's definitely like a theme at Go Long. I'm always complaining, for lack of a better term, I can't say, always complaining about how this league's going soft, and flags and fines. It's like the league's trying to find this utopian middle ground that doesn't even exist. Like, you cannot tell me football is safe. It's like saying MMA is safe. No, there's inherent violence, and that's okay. You're signing up for it as a player. You know what you're getting into. You're stepping into a certain arena. And I think that Carlton Davis plays a position where a lot of that, believe it or not, is still preserved. Yeah, the Super Bowl was just decided on what might have been a bogus penalty on James Bradbury. But in those 5 yards, like where Carlton Davis shines, where it's still legal to get physical with a receiver, he has mastered those 5 yards. Zion McCollum, backup cornerback on the team, Sam Houston State, who had some great things to say as well, wanting to be silent assassins and take people by the throat. He was great. But he broke it down. He said, like, Carlton, he wants to punch holes through receivers. Like, and you watch him, he's punching guys. Like, he is up in your grill. It doesn't matter if you're 6'4", or if you're 5'9", 5'10", like a Tyreek Hill, and if you miss, see ya. This is a 70-yard touchdown. I think 90% of cornerbacks are terrified of that scenario. So they play out with a little more technique. Maybe they got a little help inside, maybe a little help over the top. Now, Carlton is one-on-one, in your face, playing physical, and that is refreshing. It's great. And I think that alone makes him different than most dog cornerbacks in the NFL. I can't think of anybody who does it as much as him. It was great watching his battle with Jamar Chase, where, Cincinnati won the game. I mean, they're just way more talented offensively, but man, Cincinnati had to grind because of what Tampa was doing, specifically Carlton Davis. I think Chase was targeted 13 times in all and only had 60 yards. So efficiency from a cornerback doesn't get much better than that. Yeah,
and of course, it was a little bit easier for the Bengals to grind it out when the offense hands them the ball on 5 straight possessions. No shade to Gio Bernard, giving the ball back to his former team. Not that any of us are bitter here. More with Tyler Dunne coming up here next on the Locked On Bucs podcast. Wrapping things up here on a Thursday edition of the Locked On Bucs podcast, and let's finish out our conversation with Tyler Dunne of GoLongTD.com. You've mentioned all the talent on the defense a couple of times, specifically Jamel Dean. But in Carlton Davis, you have a guy who is only 26 years old. And I realize I'm saying only 26 as somebody who is rapidly approaching their 40s. But in 26, in NFL years, that's no spring chicken. This isn't a young guy in NFL standards. But he is the guy that is looked at as the veteran leader of a group that has Jamel Dean, just brought in Ryan Neal. They have Antoine Winfield Jr., who was playing at an all-pro caliber level last season until injuries kind of derailed him. What is that quality that you saw when speaking to Carlton Davis? Not so much what he said, but just how he handles himself that makes him such a good leader in that room.
Well, I think it was his whole point with the you're in for a rude awakening. We're going to wreck stuff. Plays will be made. Like, his whole point in saying all of that was the way he attacks not just games, but practice, meetings, his job is going to be contagious. Like, he wants everybody to think the same way, play the same way. He's in the DB room telling everyone nobody catches ball on us today. Like, I don't care if it's 1-on-1, 7-on-7, 11-11. Like, no, like, we're not allowing anything. Of course, hard to do when you're playing Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. They're going to get theirs. But I think when everything's against you, rules-wise, you know, with what these 32 owners want, they want points. They want people gambling on games. Nobody bets the under. Everybody's betting the over. Everybody's playing fantasy football. Like, everything is against you. So the fact that he is attacking the profession that way, and it's not just on game day that he's acting that way, talking that way, it's every day. There's no way it can't be contagious. Again, how do you quantify that? Look, if you're in the local media down there covering the team, you only see so many practices, and we'll wait to see what happens on game day. But I feel like they still have a lot of talent, a lot of players who think the same way and approach the job the same way, because they won a Super Bowl, and it wasn't Tom Brady who really won that Super Bowl. It was the defense. They had Patrick Mahomes running around for 497 yards before sacks and pass attempts. Crazy. I mean, we've all seen so much of Mahomes. Nobody has just put him in a blender like Tampa Bay did that day. A lot of those players are still around, and a lot of those players are in their prime. And Carlton Davis right now is in his prime. So I think guys just, and you can hear it in Zion McCollum's voice. I mean, he's a second-year player out of Sam Houston State. It is contagious. Like, when you see somebody up in a receiver's face in practice, in a game, those joint practices with Miami, you know, he's in a brawl getting peeled out. How can you not want to play the same way, especially when he's got the gravitas of a Super Bowl ring? It can only help you in the long run. And I like that Tampa Bay is going for it. Maybe I'm wrong. Look, if they win 4 games this year, please have me back on, and I'll say I was dead wrong, because maybe they should have. Maybe they should be thinking about Caleb Williams, and maybe they subtly are in the back of their minds. I don't know. But I think their actions suggest that they're still going for it. They still want to win games. You could have let Levante David, walk and then throw him up in the Ring of Honor down the road. You could have not given Jamel Dean that contract. You could have really tried to shed more salary than they did. I know they did a little bit, but they still kept core players, especially there on defense. I think they're trying to win. I think that's good, right? I think so many teams get caught up in just tearing it all down. What happens? They tear it down and they can't build it back up because you've poisoned the building. You've made it just such a culture of losing that one player in the draft isn't going to fix everything. So I say that through the lens of somebody who still believes in Baker Mayfield. We'll see how that pans out. I think that they can make the playoffs, maybe even win the division still.
Well, that leads me perfectly into my last Buccaneers related question here, because I'm going to ask you for your still way too early win-loss prediction for the Buccaneers and where they finish in the NFC South.
Let's go 9-8, right behind Atlanta. I do like Atlanta. I feel like Arthur Smith, Terry Fontenot are really building a roster that most of the NFL is just not equipped to stop, right? I mean, you're paying a guard, whatever they paid Chris Lindstrom, like a historic contract. No guards made more money than that. Bijan Robinson, a top 10 running back, with Tyler Algier, who ran for 1,000 last year, with big receivers, Drake London, Kyle Pitts at tight end. Desmond Ridder, we'll see. That's the big question there, obviously. But then defensively, they pay up for a lot of players. Jesse Bates, Calais Campbell. So I like Atlanta, but I do think Tampa Bay, the fact that this defense has been through the ringer, they've been in these big games late in the season, won a lot of those games themselves. And Tom Brady was remarkable. It's not a knock on Tom. I mean, he's the greatest player of all time. But I think over years and generations, people are probably going to forget that it was the defense that won that Super Bowl against Patrick Mahomes. And everybody who saw it in real time knows like that was all the defense. And Tom was efficient, but he didn't turn it over and made the plays he had to make. They ran the ball pretty well. This defense is still a top 10 unit or better. And I think, look, if Dave Canales can turn Geno Smith's career around, why not Baker Mayfield? And why can't this running game be better when you made the changes you made on the offensive line, bringing in the toothless wonder from North Dakota State, who I sat down with as well on my Tampa trip. This is where I have to plug, right? I'm going to have a longer Buccaneers story in August for anybody listening on. I think basically the point of the story would be like why Carlton Davis is right, like why this team will ride again, why they can win. I think that there's still talent. I think offensively they're making the right changes. Mike Evans is going to catch 1,000 yards every season for the next 50 years, apparently. Chris Godwin's a number one. You add it all up, even with the dead money, right? They did as much as they could given the dead money with Tom Brady's contract. I think in that division, in that conference, they can slip into the playoffs and anything can happen. I'm going to stop myself there. I don't want to get too carried away. If I start saying that they're going to win a Super Bowl, then I'm going to come across as pandering to your legion of listeners. I can't do that, but I genuinely think the Buccaneers will be a good football team this year.
Well, and I think a lot of our listeners will appreciate, they won't be thrilled that you picked them to finish second. They'll just be glad that you didn't say the New Orleans Saints.
Man, and it's the Saints, like similar to the Bucs. Again and again, they've had the opportunities to tear it down. They just keep restructuring all those contracts. Like everybody just kind of sticks around with the Saints. And then they get Derek Carr. I love Derek Carr, the person. I just did a story on Zay Jones when I was down there in Florida too. And I mean, it's crazy what he's been through, trying to throw himself out of a window 30 floors high when he was on God knows what drug. And the fact that he's even where he is with the Jaguars, it's remarkable. But of course, Derek Carr's name comes up as somebody that he says is Gandhi himself and helped him kind of discovering himself again. As a human being, Derek Carr is just the absolute top percentile that you can ever imagine. As a player, we'll see. I mean, it wasn't good last year, and he did have Devontae Adams. I want to believe, but I just don't know. I just don't know.
All right. Well, Tyler, we're going to finish things out today with a tradition that it's been way too long since we've done this, just because we tend to have the same recurring guests all the time. But we like to do a rapid fire about you as a person. So I have 5 questions here that I'm going to throw your way to get to know a little bit more about you. Not, the writer you, but the you that we would all want to hang out with on a Saturday afternoon while we're watching college football. So let's start off. What is your all-time favorite video game?
Ooh. Okay, this might be a cold start for people wanting to hang out with Tyler Dunne, but I haven't played a video game since like freshman year of college, probably, maybe sophomore year. It's been a long time, and what the hell am I, 36 years old? So it's been a while, but I'll say for the purpose of this exercise, all right, here's an old school game. All right, here's an old school one. Remember Ready to Rumble Boxing with Afro Thunder?
Yes.
How cool was that?
That
was a fun freaking game. Let's go with Ready to Rumble.
All right, I love it. Who is your all-time favorite musical artist? Can be a band, can be an individual.
Oh man, all time. Oh, but here's a little nugget. Like when I write stories, I need to be listening to something, and it's always Bon Iver. Justin Vernon. I love Bon Iver. At Spotify does like your yearly rap and what you listen to the most. It's like 20 Bon Iver songs. Yeah. So they've got me through a lot of stories. So probably them right now.
All right. What do you feel is the greatest television show of all time?
Seinfeld. Going Seinfeld. It's easy to, if we're going comedy sitcom Seinfeld, I could sit down and rip through 20 episodes like it was nothing. But I mean, if you're thinking drama, Breaking Bad, you can't be Game of Thrones was so good up until the last couple seasons. I feel like it got a little too cartoonish, a little Disney-ified. We just got into Succession. We're a little late to the party. Love Succession. My wife and I are watching that every night. Just finished season 2. But yes, let's stick with a direct answer for once. Let's just go Seinfeld. I mean, so many shows were just spawned off of that humor. And the fact that it's quoted like it is 30 years later and has held up is remarkable.
I was never a Seinfeld fan. I've tried, and I just never liked it.
Are you a Friends fan?
The Office. The Office is my go-to.
I love The Office.
But this isn't about me. This is about you. So we need to know who your favorite superhero is.
Superhero. Ooh. Oh, man, I'm going to give you a really lame answer. I don't really have one. I never really got into Marvel, even as a kid. Like, I've just been into sports my whole life. Like, even as a little kid, like, I didn't like Superman or Spider-Man or Batman or any of that. I just would watch ESPN. And I'm sure, you were about the same age. Remember when I loved the Charlotte Hornets as a little kid, and you'd wait an hour for a 1-minute highlight on SportsCenter, or you could flip over to headline news and you just get the score on the bottom line. And I can remember waiting on bated breath, like get the score, just scrolling along. I don't know. It's just always for better or worse. I'm not even trying to put myself up on a pedestal. It's probably for worse. I just have been obsessed with sports. I just never got into superheroes. I know it's just super lame.
Yeah. I remember watching SportsCenter for like 4 hours in a row, and it was always the same show, but I just wanted to wait for that same highlight every time. All right.
We're waiting for Eric Rhett touchdowns, right? Who else we got? Dilfer and Rydell Anthony and Jaquez Green.
Yeah, and I wanted to hear Stuart Scott do the Bulls highlights again, and those were the good days. All right, final question. It's probably going to be the most difficult, but unfortunately, Tyler, you are being put to death, and you are being given a final meal. I need an entree, a dessert, and a beverage.
I love this. Okay, beverage is easy because here I will pander to your listeners. I'm wearing the shirt right now, High Lie. I love every time I'm down in Tampa, I get over to Cigar City Brewing. Love me some High Lie. Actually, when I was down there, I did a Q&A podcast with Patrick Laird as well. Unbelievably fascinating guy. We talked for a couple hours. He just was all over the place. Such a deep thinker. So that's up there if you want to check it out. So there's the beverage. Going High Lie. Okay. Love chicken wings here in Buffalo. And if anybody is passing through Western New York, make sure you get to 911 Tavern or Barbell. 1 and 1A probably. Or Elmo's. I'd go with 911 Tavern, Elmo's, Barbell. But if it's my last meal, I think it's just got to be a straight up ribeye steak. Like a healthy amount of fat, not too much, all the necessary marinated, whatever, some spices, everything you could possibly need. If it's up here in Western New York, Tempo had the best ribeye, although they shut down, I think. So everybody knows where you get your go-to ribeye. And then what was like a side you said?
You can throw in a side, but also a dessert.
Oh, dessert. That's what it was. Dessert. Let's just go with whatever my wife chooses, because that's always the debate. Whenever we go out for dinner or something, like I'm always full because I usually, ate like a freaking banshee, and she's like working the apps and she's like, doing the mental calculations on how much room she has for dessert. And I'm just kind of like, Home meal. I'm like, I'm not getting dessert. I'm just going to even eat and want to go home. And then she always chooses the right dessert. And I eat off of her dessert, even though I said I wasn't going to eat dessert. So whatever she chooses is what I'll go with.
Fun scientific fact: humans have a second dessert stomach, that there's always room for dessert, no matter how full you feel. My father-in-law and I realized that one day. So, all right. Well, Tyler, I really appreciate you giving me some of your time and coming on, talking Carlton Davis, talking about the Bucs, but let everybody know where they can find everything that you're doing. As you said, you have another long-form Buccaneers piece coming out here in August. Everyone's going to want to check that out. But yeah, let everybody know where they can find your stuff.
I appreciate that. Yep. Just it's golongtd.com. If you read other newsletters on Substack, that's our platform. You can get the Substack app and subscribe right there. I know the Carlton Davis story was open, to all. Some stories are open, some are just for our paid subscribers. So let the Bucs fans know now that story will most likely, it will just be for our paid subscribers. So that's my pitch. If you want to know why Carlton Davis was right and go deeper and why the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are going to make the playoffs and win, we'll have a story for the paid subscribers in early August.
All right, Tyler, once again, thank you so much for giving me some of your time. Really appreciate it. And again, I cannot stress enough, for those that have not read this piece on Carlton Davis, you have to do it. It is really absolutely fascinating. So Tyler, thank you so much, buddy. I appreciate you.
Hey, no, thank you, James. Loved it. And I really appreciate the kind words.
A big thank you once again to Tyler Dunne. He was absolutely fantastic. And I get the feeling that will not be the last time that you hear from him on this show, but it will be the last you hear of him on this episode. With that, we will bid you all a fair adieu. Make sure you are following everything on Twitter at Locked On Bucs, at Yarcho_Bucs, at DHarrison82. And of course, give Tyler a follow at Ty Dunne. That's TYDUNNE. Show him your appreciation for all the work that he put in on that article and for coming on to the show. If you have any thoughts, ideas, topics, anything at all, of course, you can send those in to lockedonbucspodcast@gmail.com. Hope you all have an absolutely outstanding day. Stay safe, stay healthy, fire the cannons. We thank you so much for joining us right here on Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.